what I'll be doing here is working through a quadratic equation that we're going to solve using completing the square. I have the steps here that we've worked through. I'll use them as I go through this question. And what I would suggest if you have trouble with this is use this video. Even if it's a different question, you can follow through the steps with me. Please pause when you're having trouble, or pause and go back, or just pause so you can work out your own math, and then restart it going on to the next step. So here we go. So I have a quadratic equation here. 2x squared minus 18x minus 43 equals negative 4x. And we see here the first thing we want to do is get the constants on the right side and the variables on the left side. So in this case, so we're going to do this step right here. It will show up in blue. I need to get the constants on the right side. So here's negative 43. That's a constant. I'm going to have to add 43 to both sides. And I also want to get the variables on the left side. Well, I have a 4x here, so I have to add 4x to both sides. So the variables are on the left side, which leaves me with 2x squared minus negative 18 plus 4 is negative 14x equals 43 over here on the right side. So we did that, got the variables on the left side and the constants on the right side. Now what we need to do is go on to step 2. If the quadratic term does not have a coefficient of 1, then divide both sides by the coefficient. The quadratic term is the one with the squared. So here's the quadratic term. We check, does that have a coefficient of 1? It doesn't. So since it doesn't, we have to divide both sides by that coefficient, which is 2. If it did have a coefficient of 1, you would just go on to step 3. But it does not. So we're going to divide both sides by 2. Dividing both sides by 2. So we're doing step 2 here in green. Dividing both sides by 2 gives us 2x squared divided by 2 is just x squared. Negative 14 divided by 2 is negative 7x. Equals, and we actually just leave this. Now you can reduce. If it reduces, this one doesn't reduce. So we're going to leave it as a improper fraction. So we're done that. Next step, this is the actual completing the square part. So we'll work through this in red. We might end up even adding another color in there, but find half the linear coefficient, square it, and add it to both sides. And then it says if necessary, you'll have to get a common denominator. So we're going to take half the linear term. Well, the linear term is this one. It's the one with just an x to the first. We're going to take half of it. So sometimes you have to do this work to the side. So we'll take half that. So negative 7 times a half is negative 7 over 2. So we took half the linear term. I'm going to check that off. So that was that part. Now we square it. So I'm going to take another little line here. I'm going to say negative 7 halves, and I'm going to square it. A negative times a negative is positive, and 7 times 7 is 49, and 2 times 2 is 4. So I squared it. Check. And add it to both sides. Now, these two things, this left side equals the right side. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put plus the negative 7 halves squared over here, and I'm doing that for a reason, and then plus 49 fourths over here on the right side, because they're the same thing. So we did that. It says, if necessary, get a common denominator to add the right side. So we will have to do that, and we'll do that as we get to the next step. So let's go ahead and start writing our next step. We'll go ahead and do this in black. To start with, I'm going to go ahead and add these. 43 halves and 49 fourths. Again, if you need to come to the side, go right ahead. So we're adding these. So this is actually still part of step 3. We need to get a common denominator. Common denominator here is 4, so this needs a 2 over 2. And so this is 86 fourths plus 49 fourths, which gives us 135 fourths. All right. So over on the right here, we added those together. We have 135 fourths. Now on the left, now we'll take a look at this part 4 here, or step 4. Write the left side as a perfect square, x plus blank squared. And what we do here, and we've talked through why this works, so we can just do it here as a part of our process. It's going to be x. It's actually this value right here, x plus, and then I wanted to write this in now. This is half the linear coefficient. That's what goes here. And we've talked about this, showed why it worked. So it's actually the number that we did here. So what was half the linear coefficient? Well, that's why I wrote this here. It's this, negative 7 halves. So in fact, instead of writing x plus negative 7 halves, you can just write x minus 7 halves. So that step is complete. And now we're going to go ahead and solve for x. So we're going to do this last step, step 5. We'll do step 5 here. So how do we do that? We take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. We have to put plus or minus here. All right, so we did that. So over on the left here, we're just left with x, and here I'm going to just write x minus 7 halves instead of plus and negative. We took the square root, cancels with the squared. Step 2, so we took the square root of both sides, simplify the square root as much as possible. So over on the right here, we have the square root of 135 over 4. We know that we can take the square root of the top over the square root of the bottom. And so this, you actually could do that over here too if you'd rather do your side work on the side, hence the name side work. The square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 135. Well, 135, if you work through that, 9 goes into there. So 9 goes into 135. 1 times 9 is 9. 45. 45, that's 5. 15 times. So that's the square root of 9 times the square root of 15, which is 3 root 15 over 2. So that was simplifying as much as possible. So in fact, I'll just go ahead and erase this part here. We did that simplifying. Square root of 135 over square root of 4 is 3 root 15 over 2. And now what we want to do is add 7 halves. We want to add or subtract the constant from both sides. So we're doing finally this last step. So we're going to add 7 halves to both sides. And so normally what we do is we put the 7 halves first, 7 halves, plus or minus 3 root 15 over 2. We can't simplify that any further, so that's our answer. So as you work through completing the square, you can use this video along the way. Again, pause it as necessary. Notice you may have to do a decent amount of work on the side, so give yourself plenty of room. And hopefully that's a big help to you. You can use this video as much as you need until you can do it without working through the steps or without looking at a sample.